Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of Can It Take a K26, the show where we take a variety of Nerf blasters and see if they can be upgraded using a K26 spring. I am your host, Captain Xavier. Our first contestant is the Nerf Longstrike CS6, so named, of course, because it's part of the clip system and came with a 6-round magazine. Yes, Nerf calls them the clip system. They're actually magazines. Some people like to call them clipazines. We all know what you're talking about. Let's move on. The Longstrike originally came out in 2010 as part of the N-Strike series. It originally came with a barrel extension, a pop-up sight, and a 6-round magazine. The stock, which is not removable, holds 2 additional 6-round magazines. It could probably hold some of the larger ones, but not very well. It originally came in blue, but it also was released in Sonic Green as well as Whiteout. Now, the downside is that it is, of course, reverse plunger, which is an odd choice given that this came out 4 years after the long shot, which was so much more functional being direct plunger. Why they chose to go with a reverse plunger, we may never know. But what we are here to answer today is, can it take a K26? Let's find out. Alright, you can get the stock off when you take it apart, and it's not all that difficult to make it so it is removable. You can also, just by filing these, so instead of being a sharp edge on this side, they're sloped both ways, it would then click in and click out. I'm actually kind of tempted to take one of these and see if I can't make it standard Nerf mount, just because I think it would be neat. I'm also not going to put it back in for this, because I think the thumbnail would look better with the different size blasters I plan to use. Anyway, moving on. Looking inside, you can indeed see that it is reverse plunger, which is just ridiculous. A ridiculous design for this, but I'm sure they had their reasons. It does still have an entirely internal plunger, unlike things like the Recon, where it came out the back. They did, of course, make people make upgrade kits for it, but most people don't bother because the long shot is so much better, has such a much bigger plunger tube. What people typically do with this, and what I intend to do with this, is they put an XBZ tank in here and then make it fire that way. You also could fairly easily replace the internals with a direct plunger system. Given the design, you could even have it be a direct prime where you actually pull on something back here rather than here and just use this to chamber rounds and use that to prime it. But once again, why bother when the long shot is so much better? Though I do like this shell better than the long shot because the long shot does not have a trigger guard, which is something I never much cared for. But that's a personal preference. The downside is there isn't an easy way to put a front pump on it like you can on a long shot. So back to the question at hand, can I take a K26? No, of course not. It will not fit, though I am mildly curious. No, you really couldn't do, I was hoping maybe you could do a power stock and basically put a spring behind it, but there isn't enough room. You could make a little extension here, maybe glue on a Spectre cap or something to give you enough room to actually compress a spring behind the piston. And so you'd have 2 springs, one behind it and one around it. But that is beyond the purview of this series. That level of additional mods is beyond this. So, unfortunately, no, as expected, the long shot cannot take a K26 due to its reverse plunger nature. Our next contestant is the Tristrike, which has been requested numerous times, and I've actually been looking forward to doing. The Tristrike was originally released in 2016 as part of the N-Strike Modulus line. It came with a missile launcher stock and a Mega Dart launching barrel, which quite honestly is what I bought it for. I like attachments, and those attachments I thought would go well with my modular Stampede, so I got it for those, and they do in fact work lovely. Wasn't a huge fan of the blaster itself because it's not front pump. I don't much care for side pump. You can't reach the mag release with your trigger finger, which is, in my opinion, kind of a design flaw. But even stock, it had really good performance, as most people who reviewed it were pleasantly surprised, and I was myself. So it's not a bad platform. It's got the stock mount and the barrel mount. You can do all sorts of things with it, and it is direct plunger. And unlike most of the blasters that had a side prime handle, it does have slam fire, which is an interesting feature for what was kind of vaguely the replacement for the Longstrike, vaguely in appearance, if not in actual nature. But what we want to know is, can it take a K26? Let's find out. Okay, well, I have a confession to make. I've already been inside this blaster and modded it, and unfortunately, no, it cannot take a K26 for pretty much the same reason all of the clip system blasters could not take K26. K26 is just a little bit too big to easily fit. It interferes with the catch mechanism, unfortunately. What I was able to do was to find a slightly smaller spring and coil it all the way around this back block and up into the gun, essentially doubling the draw weight, so I doubled the power of the gun, and it's really quite lovely. I think this is out of like a Recon or a Retaliator stock spring is what I ended up putting in there, and it worked lovely. K26 was a little too big. It also wouldn't fit back into this stop mechanism back here, so you weren't getting enough compression. Trying to side prime something as heavy as a K26, you pretty much have to use both hands and it won't work. You can get away with it in things like the long shot because you can do a front pump, and you could probably do a front pump for this. I don't know that I've seen one. I'm absolutely certain somebody's done it. They probably just used a Recon style one and attached it to the Recon barrel, but I haven't. I don't believe I've seen it. But if you know who has, go ahead and post in the comments below. Anyway, cannot take a K26, but upgrades beautifully and fires magnificently. Slam fire is lovely on something like this, and so that's pretty cool. I'm sure that there are kits out there that beef this thing up beyond all reason, but unfortunately K26 is not the stuff to use. It's just a little bit too big to fit. So let's move on to the next contestant. Alright, well that was of course a no to a K26 in this, but yes to a spring upgrade. I do not know what the stock FPS was because I didn't have a chronograph back when this thing was stock, but it is now shooting around 75 to 80 FPS. So that's fun. On to the next contestant. Our next contestant is the Stats Blast Destroyer XL. I picked this up at Goodwill just yesterday and almost passed it up, and then I noticed something about it that was very unusual and that made me desperately want to take it home and try to make it be less crap. And that is that this blaster, and I can't really think of any others that are like this, but this blaster is very distinctly left-handed. The priming handle and the feed location are both on the right side of the gun, which means it's much easier to operate it with your left hand than with your right hand. And that, to me, was worth picking up and seeing if there was anything that could be done with it. It does have a couple of strange features. It did originally have a stock and a barrel and some kind of carry handle looking thing. The rail here is not quite Nerf compatible. It's a little too big, but you might be able to shave it down and make it work if you really felt like it. It is, of course, oddly supposed to look vaguely like a P90, which makes this thing down here kind of odd. And when I first saw it, I thought that it was a magazine that was jammed, that someone had put in upside down and had gotten stuck and couldn't get back out. But when I actually looked at the breech, I realized that no, it's actually a muzzle load gun, a single shot muzzle load gun, and this is just a dart holder that's an upside down magazine, which I thought was actually kind of clever. But the real question is, can it take a K26? Because it needs it, because this thing is pathetic. So I'm going to pop it open and see what I can't do to this. Okay, there's is all well and fascinating. It is direct plunger, which is something. Well, I'll be buggered, ladies and gentlemen. Would you believe it? It can take a K26. Okay, it does have an air restrictor. That is unfortunately glued in. I'm gonna brass the barrel. Okay, well, I have brassed the barrel and I have added a K26. We will see if this thing can actually prime with a K26 in it. It's got a really simple internal mechanism. I did take out the dart stop that did nothing, and I have also, there was a spring missing that keeps the barrel actually straight and sort of in line. So let's put it back together and see if by any miracle this thing can actually prime with a K26. Alright, moment of truth. Ho! It primed. Nice! Oh, that makes me happy. Alright, well, that was a complete success. Not only can it take K26, it takes it very well. There is a little bit of spring rattle because the only K26 I had left was just a hair too short. I've got more K26 coming, so when that comes in, I will put a slightly longer K26 in here to get rid of that spring rattle. But it's gone from not even shooting 10 feet, probably closer to 5 feet, to firing 85 feet per second. It is still, unfortunately, a hopelessly impractical weapon for, using in a war, because the way it loads is you pull it back and this little shell-looking thing comes out, and you feed a dart in, and then you close it, and it's a little bit awkward and cumbersome. But the fact that it's an all left-handed blaster, it's a very pretty, P90 looking thing. It's got this magazine dart holder, and it now shoots 85 feet per second. I am absolutely pleased with punch with this purchase. I will definitely be painting it up in my usual colors and putting it on my wall because that is just a really fun single shot blaster in my opinion. So there you have it, a yes for the Destroyer XL. As this is the final episode of the magazine season of Can It Take a K26, I figured we'd have one last surprise guest, one that has been requested a number of times and that has created a great deal of controversy. That's right, the Deploy CS6. So named, of course, because it is part of the clip system and came with a 6-round magazine. The Deploy was originally released in 2010 as part of the N-Strike series. It has the usual features. It's got some rail, it's got a flashlight that takes 3 AAA batteries, which is neat because it was an actual functional flashlight. It does have a barrel mount and stock points, of course. There were releases of this that came with a sling as well as a doubled 2 6-round magazines connected together to create a flip clip. It does have a couple of, I feel, amiable features. For instance, the fact that it is front pump is nice. The pump is not particularly comfortable. It doesn't have slam fire, so the front pump isn't terribly, useful. You can't slam fire it, so that's a shame. And it is somewhat cumbersome to reload, especially if you are left-handed. It becomes very cumbersome to reload if you're a lefty. Which is unfortunate. I don't believe that it's nearly as bad as most people make it out to be. It has absolutely been vilified by the Nerf community, by one particular Nerfer especially, who hates it utterly, and as a result, his fans have a tendency to spew a lot of anger and hate towards it, which I really don't like, and I particularly don't like in my comment section. About 95% of the people that I've taken the commenting privileges away from have been because they insulted me over the fact that I dared to buy a Deploy. So allow me to lay this to rest. I don't buy Deploys because I think they're good guns. I would never use a Deploy as a primary. It's reverse plunger, so it's pretty much unupdatable. I have heard of people who have put like Strife internals into a Deploy just to confuse people, and I find that hilarious and magnificent. But I have no intention of doing that. I buy Deploys for the parts. There are several really cool mods that I've wanted to do for a really long time that use parts that can really only be found on the Deploy. Now the Deploy's stock that moves around actually makes a really nice looking replacement stock for the long shot, and I plan to use that when I finally get around to doing a full upgrade on a long shot. There are also a number of really interesting mods I've seen that use the magazine well, because unlike any other blaster, the magazine well is completely self-contained. You can take it off and attach it to other things and put a magazine well on something that didn't normally have a magazine well. So I'm after the parts. The front grip is, like I said, not a good grip. There's also plenty of screws. These are the older models which have the longer screws, which are used in things like stampedes, which are nice if you occasionally lose stampede screws, so I have replacement screws. There's also an unnecessary number of springs in this thing for all of the popping stuff, and those are also useful. So I'm after the parts. Those of you who, spewed hatred into my comment section about me being a noob because I used a deploy, now you know why I did it. No, you can't have your commenting privileges back. You've learned your lesson. So the real question today is, can it take a K26? And the answer is almost certainly no, because it's reverse plunger, but I need to take it apart anyway in order to do the mods that I want to do with it, so we're going to take this thing apart. Huh. I had no idea there was a dart holder in this pump. No wonder it's such a weird shape. Turns out it wasn't as difficult to take apart as I thought. You just have to figure out that they put holes in the stock to get to the screws that are covered by the stock, because the stock is kind of permanently attached. So, taking a quick look. No, of course you can't take K26 because it is reverse plunger. Once again, if you really felt like it, you could probably find an upgrade spring for it. Ones for the Recon they're probably about the same size, since they, were roughly the same era, or it's definitely not the same size as the Longstrike. It seems smaller. But the Recon one might fit. You also might be able to you could definitely do a power stock on this one, because it wouldn't be able to fold anymore, but you could easily add on additional tube here and have spring that pushed on the back. That would work perfectly well. If you really wanted to try to beef up a deploy. I don't plan to, because all of the ones that I have, I fully intend to gut for parts. But that is how I would go about doing it. I would definitely do a power stock. I'd try to find an upgraded spring. Upgrade all the usual things, the catch springs. And if I were going to mod one of these, if I had a good reason, like if somebody commissioned me to do one, couple of things that I would definitely do is make it so it no longer deploys, because that feature is gimmicky and frankly pointless. By itself, it's not a particularly ugly looking gun. It's just with the wobbly stock and the whole thing folding sideways. If I were going to be modding this, what I would probably do is permanently attach the handle, get rid of the whole locking mechanism thing because it's silly and pointless. Replace it, just make it so it was all solid. Probably put a trigger guard on it. I would permanently attach the stock so it didn't slide, so that I could then put a power stock in it to upgrade the spring. Whether I would make this continue to rotate sideways is questionable. If I were going to be using it as a lefty, I would actually keep it so that it didn't flip down, because it makes it a little bit easier to change the magazine, but not a lot. For a righty, it wouldn't really matter one way or the other, except if you keep it up, then you've got the magazine out the top like a Bren gun, which, if that's what you're going for, is fine. I mean, this would be a perfectly acceptable option to mod into a Bren gun if you wanted to make it flywheel, like people have done. That's probably what I would do, is turn it into a flywheel Bren gun, but I plan to just use a Strife to build my Bren gun. Anyway, there you have it. I'm actually not going to put it back together because, as I said, I'm stripping it for parts for other stuff, and as long as I've got it open, I might as well leave it open. So for the final word for all of you out there who want to know why on earth I would ever buy a deploy, let's take a look. We got one very large but weak spring out of it, but it can be used in things like the X-Shot Eliminator to just add a little bit more spring weight. We got the main spring, which is roughly the same as that in a Recon or an Alpha, Recon or an Alpha Trooper, so you could double up on that and improve one of those. The little sight thing on the top happens to fit an Elite dart quite snugly, so you could make a singled barrel out of that for something, you know, instead of using brass, you could use this to put it onto, say, a Drain Blaster if you were insane, or onto a Titan in order to single it for Elites. It also fits Demolisher rockets. It's a little loose, but if you put some tape around the outside, it would hold a Demolisher rocket fairly well. This part of it I really don't have a whole lot of use for, but I do occasionally just cut up shells to use the plastic on other blasters, but that one's not a whole lot of use. The grip does have its uses for things like the 4 grips on bazookas and other things. There are places where having a grip that you don't mind cutting up is in fact useful. The stock, as I said, I fully intend to put this on my long shot when I finally get around to upgrading a long shot. It fits on quite nicely and is much less bulky and cumbersome than the stock one. For springs, people keep asking me, where do you find all of your catch springs? Well, inside the Deploy there were 8 different springs that are roughly the size of catch springs, and some of them are actually very heavy. So these two would be excellent upgraded catch springs in a Hot Shock or a Night Finder or anything else you're putting K26 in. Some of the other ones are a little bit lighter, but if you double them up, they'd be fine. They're also in multiple sizes, so they fit inside each other, which means you can use them for doubling up things. So that's where I get a lot of my catch springs. I take apart crappy blasters and just strip them for parts. And the Deploy has way more catch spring size springs than any other Nerf gun that I've taken apart so far. I also got a whole bin full of screws that are the same size as Stampede screws, which, given how often I open up ire, some of the screws are starting to get a little stripped, so it's nice to have replacements. Also, the wide-headed screws are used for lots of things that I do for cosmetic work as well. Most of these little bits are junk, but they're there as well. There is also a barrel mount. This is something that I use to add barrel mounts to guns that don't come with barrel mounts. And finally, there is this whole assembly, which is a whole, the whole working mechanisms for a magazine-fed gun, which you could easily then put into a gun that wasn't magazine-fed. I have plans for what I am going to do with them. I've got 2 builds that involve adding one of these onto them in order to make a non-magazine fed gun magazine fed. So this is why I get annoyed when people go out of their way to go to the comment section of my channel and insult me for buying a Deploy when they are in fact incredibly useful, just not as a blaster. When it was said that anybody who uses a Deploy as their primary is clearly a noob, I don't entirely disagree with that, but I do disagree with insulting somebody for it, because it's entirely possible that they are in fact new, that they went to Goodwill and the only gun that was available was a Deploy, and they thought it was great. It's magazine fed, it's front pump, it does the deploy thing, and they took it and they went to a Nerf war excited to play, and all of these people go out of their way to insult them, and now you've got a Deploy, you're a noob, you should just quit, don't just kill yourself. I've heard people say these things, and it's disgusting. Don't do that. Be nice to them, go, what's with the Deploy? And they go, well, that's all I had. And you go, oh, well, here, borrow my Alpha Trooper, it's much better, you should try to get yourself one. Don't be jerks. It's just not cool, and it ruins the entire community for everybody. So, as my public service announcement, there are reasons for Deploys. There are good blasters, there are bad blasters, but try to be a decent person about it. Alright, enough of that. I'll get down off my soapbox and we will recap. Alright, for those of you keeping score at home, that was a no for the Longstrike. That was a no for the Tristrike. That was a yes for the Destroyer XL. And that was a no for the Deploy. The next season will start next week, assuming my K26 order arrives. And it really won't have a specific theme like the previous ones did. I did one-shots, then revolvers, and then clip system. This one will be doing everything else. I'll have an episode on lever actions, I'll have an episode on shotguns, I'll have an episode on Busby stuff. I've got it all planned out, so it'll be interesting. Most of them are going to be based on the things people have been suggesting that just didn't really fit in any of the other seasons. So it should be a fun one. I hope there will actually be some blasters that can take K26 in that series. Clip system was kind of a letdown. Pretty much everything couldn't, but we will see. Anyway, keep suggestions coming for things you'd like to see. Keep the ideas, comments, concerns, whatever else you want to put down in the comments. Just don't call me a noob for owning a deploy, because it won't end well for you. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching.